Okay, YouTube's on. Hi, YouTube. We're checking out private equity. It's taking over gaming from Asmongold. I'm very curious about this. This might be a long react. It might be, I don't know. I don't know how much I'll have to say about this. It might be something that I learn. It might be some things that I have some things to say about. I certainly like to talk about how we don't want to have investors. We don't want to have I don't want to have shares of a company that I sell to investors, right? Because I feel like that would add certain overhead and requirements for me to deliver by certain quarters for these investors that don't necessarily align with our own views of when we're going to make money. It sounds bad. I don't know if there's a better way to word it. It's pretty early in the morning, so give me some time to boot up here. But either way, we're going to jump into this. We're going to see what gets said, and if I have anything to add to it, and if Asman has any takes, he does have some insider info about this with the businesses that he runs. So yeah, we'll see.
You've probably seen something like this. Vampires in Redfall floating aimlessly in the sky. Starfield.
We just watched the first minute, but
I don't think I ever had this issue in Starfield, actually. I don't think I did.
Go through it again. It's not
Characters.
Because I can actually see it.
And Hogwarts Legacy wizards falling through the ground into nothingness.
I think another
Hogwarts Legacy wasn't that buggy to me. I mean, it had some bugs, but it wasn't that bad.
reason why this shit happens too, by the way, is the fact that video games have so many more variables.
Yeah, it's true.
Like, there's way more things that can go wrong.
Well, I can admit.
That's absolutely true. I mean, it's just that they're comparing here like 3 open world games, and I'll tell you what, it's much more difficult to test an open world game because of the variety of things that can occur within that same area. When you're testing a linear game, like let's say Uncharted, right? There's a very limited amount of things that can happen within, let's say, like an encounter that occurs. So, and there's very few variables, right? If you test like Hogwarts Legacy, you have to test oftentimes multiple different player configurations and player gear configurations or spell configurations with different encounters. And with Uncharted, it's like, well, you only really have these many guns that are available in this level anyway, so this is all you have, right? So he's right. Like, I think that, and for these bugs that were shown here, these are what I often call cosmetic bugs, right? These first 2 are cosmetic bugs that I call them. They're bugs that they don't impact your stability of the gameplay. This is just it's a floating character.
Redfall,
Great.
Floating aimlessly in the sky.
It's a missing head mesh. Okay, it sucks for immersion, but did it cause a crash? No. It's still a bug. It still needs to be addressed, but it's not nearly as bad as
the first minute, but we just go through it again. It's not
Characters.
Because I can actually see it.
And Hogwarts
this
Legacy
is more
wizards
realistic
falling
issue
through the ground into nothingness.
I think another reason why this shit
because that will cause your player to fall out of the world. I don't remember what happens in Hogwarts Legacy if you fall out of the world. Some games have pretty good detection of being able to put you back up onto the landscape. In that case, in which case I would call it more of like a slightly cosmetic bug, but still a bug that needs to be addressed pretty much ASAP. So for me there's different variables. I don't know what private equity has to do with these bugs occurring. Sometimes it can just be that QA missed something. It can be that maybe a solution that was put into place by the programmers didn't work as rigidly as intended. So I don't know. It's not the greatest start to this, but we'll see.
Happens too, by the way, is the fact that video games have so many more variables. Like, there's way more things that can go wrong.
While I can admit glitches and bugs can be hilarious, they've also left me wondering, is this the new standard? Then, just this January, one of my favorite series, Deus Ex,
The Embracer
a franchise
group.
that arguably transformed gaming when it was released in 2000, got canceled out of nowhere. And Deus Ex is not alone. In the last year, unprecedented numbers of games have been canceled, workers laid off, and studios shuttered.
That's
the
true.
teams that make Saints Row.
Speaking of, some news about Bungie last night too, and yeah, it's a real shame. It's a real shame. I will say this, for anybody who's watching who might be interested in getting into the industry, I will say this. Now is the best time to start an indie studio. The best time. AAA is having its problems, okay? That doesn't mean that all AAA is bad. It doesn't mean that these individuals were bad developers. But there is certainly a restructuring of the way that AAA and a lot of these larger companies is being held, and that means that more money will likely be flowing downwards to some of the smaller studios, and more people, especially gamers, will be looking for smaller studios that can fill the gap of these AAA games that don't seem to be hitting the mark as often as they used to. So start an indie company now. It's the best time. You have so much talent out there. I know that it's tough, that not having a job, not having an income. Do what you can, stay alive, stay safe, stay fed, and work on games. It will fix itself. We're gonna have to keep pushing through this.
Red Faction, and Deus Ex have all lost their jobs.
Y'all remember Red Faction? I played Red Faction 2. That game was so cool.
Was cool.
Even studios that make huge games like Tomb Raider and Borderlands are being hit with downsizing. Now, you're probably thinking, Alec, there's a very simple reason for all of this. The economy is rough, video game sales are down, and tons of industries are laying people off. Do these companies have any other option besides tightening their belts or shutting?
I mean, it's probably multivariate, right? I wouldn't blame it on one thing. I think there are genuinely some companies that they just wouldn't be able to sustain that, right? We've talked about how expensive it is to have like 10 employees, for instance. And let's just take California, right? 10 employees that you probably have to pay $90,000 to $100,000 a year. It's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. It isn't cheap, and if sales are down, or if they're not making good games anymore, and it's not selling like hotcakes like they used to, it is the way it is. And sometimes companies that really want to make good games, they do have multiple influences that could screw that over, and even it could just be that, I don't know, not everyone's a winner. Hey Lazarla, how you doing?
Down?
Well, the reality is that the video game industry doesn't have anything to do with making a bad game. For example, Capcom is hiring more people, and I bet From Software is probably doing the same thing.
Early stream, yeah. The guy fixing our AC is going to be here early. I just didn't want to be, I didn't want to be in the house with that because, like getting ready in the morning, taking a shower. Hey, Mr. AC guy. Oh, here's my Willie.
Nintendo isn't experiencing this in the same level that other people are. So the reality is that
it's a good start for a fan fiction. I understand, it's good yaoi bait. The ladies love it. But it's not my thing. AC guys are not my personal pick personally. Especially these guys because they're failing to fix our AC for like weeks. I'm going to stick my dick in any guy. It's not going to be somebody who's fucked me over like this. Okay, what was Asma saying?
Capcom is hiring more people, and I bet From Software is probably doing the same thing. I bet Nintendo isn't experiencing this in the same level that other people are. So the reality is that the reason why these companies are failing is because the games aren't selling at the ratio that the companies predicted them to. That's the reason.
That is true in a lot of cases, yeah.
Because things just weren't adding up. I mean, in 2023, American consumers spent $57 billion on video games alone.
Yeah, but like how much is that microtransaction?
I started digging.
Yeah, like you have to split that up by market because the mobile market is the biggest by far, and you can let's estimate it this way: that if 25% more games come out in a year, but the revenue of the games industry only increases by 5% in the year, then that's very obviously that across all boards, you can pretty much safely say that there is a decrease in per title revenue, right? So it's really that I just think that in a lot of cases, AAA, it got over bloated. I mean, it's just costing too much money for a lot of these studios to make games. And there's no way that they can make as much money back to satisfy the investors that they have. And I mean that's where we can talk about, the private equity is taking over gaming. That's the entire point of this. Trying to Game Maker Studio? Ooh, nice. I like Game Maker. I liked it back when I tried it.
And I discovered it is not the result of a tough economy. In fact, that's just a helpful cover story for what's really going on.
What's really going on?
To understand the present reality of the video game industry, we have to go back to the start of the pandemic.
COVID.
2020 was a
That's the guy that invented COVID.
As people were locked inside their homes.
COVID was a huge year. Yeah. The amount of money moving around in the game industry during COVID was insane. You could pitch almost any game idea, and as long as it was halfway decent, you would get money for it. It was insane time, and people were hiring all over the place. It was so easy to move to a different job that would pay more. It was wild. I miss it. It was nice. It was nice for me. But yeah, afterwards, a lot of the money just poof. Otherwise, I'm going to Oklahoma with my family. It's like 2 days. Is that an exciting thing?
Skyrocketed so much, in fact, that investors started eyeing the industry as their next great cash cow.
Yeah.
2021 is where you see the massive investment. When you look at a chart, it's like 2020, 2019, 2021.
Polygon.
It's wild.
All those
I do think this is definitely true. I think this would have happened on its own, but he's definitely right that the pandemic was like an accelerator for like large fund investment into video games.
franchises.
But I think that what's funny about this is that we're already seeing the recession of that now.
Layoffs or closures I mentioned a bit ago, one thing ties them together. A huge video game conglomerate called Embracer Group.
Yeah.
Emboldened by this once-in-a-lifetime market, Embracer Group bought up studio
The flame of
after
ambition.
studio, including many I've already mentioned, makers of Borderlands, Tomb Raider, Deus Ex. They even bought the company that owns the board game Settlers of Catan.
Ooh,
I didn't know that.
That's the new expansion in PoE.
The workers at Embracer Studios were kind of excited.
I would say that there was a more positive reception.
That's Alex, a former mission designer at Embracer-owned Volition Games, which made Saints Row. Embracer,
Yeah, but Saints Row was bad and people didn't play it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I don't think the new Saints Row did nearly as well as previous. I mean, I maybe we can look up some SteamDB data for the new Saints Row. I'm curious about it. Saints Row has a 57.5 rating, and the all-time peak was 4,147 players. That's not good. That is not good. I don't know how many people were working at Volition, but it's like, can you blame Embracer for a game going bad when this game was just not great to begin with? I mean, if you look at Saints Row, like the third, I don't even know. I guess the fourth would be even better. This had an all-time peak of 42.2 thousand players. That's a massive difference. That's a factor of 10. That's wild. And I think Saints Row the third is probably even bigger. It's not, but it's bigger than the new Saints Row. There are more people playing Saints Row the third right now than are playing the new one. There's 133 in this one, 127 in Saints Row 4, and 152 in Saints Row the third. Can we blame the entirety of Volition's downfall on the new on Embracer Group taking over? Like, really? When Saints Row the third has let's just use the owner estimations, minimum and maximum here. 4 to 15 million owners. The fourth has 4 to 12 million owners, and the new one has at max 1 million owners. Like, clearly this game just didn't do well, and I wouldn't blame that on COVID, and I wouldn't blame that on Embracer Group. Simply put, the game was just not good. It isn't. I'm in designing posters. We're gonna tape on the doors. Damn, that sounds like a lot of fun. I'm pretty jealous. Sounds pretty cool.
So, like, what a surprise! Like, what do you think's gonna happen? Like, you make a game that's bad,
Yeah.
people don't like the game, then, like, how do you expect to keep your job? Like, if you go and you're a cook and you are like,
And it sucks because not everybody on the development team is responsible for the game being bad, right? We talk a lot about where the buck stops, I guess, with games. And in a lot of cases, it is producers and designers, right? Because they'll often have the final say on how systems are. And in a lot of cases, if a game plays bad, it is usually due to, like, some gameplay problems or even narrative, in which case it falls on, like, the narrative designers, the writers. A lot of times, if a game, like, just isn't fun, but it's not very buggy, then obviously the programmers did a good job. It's just, the game wasn't good. or maybe the game is good, but the game's buggy as hell, and it's like, well, was that the designer's fault, or was that maybe the issue with production, or was it an issue with an inexperienced programming team, a bad code architect? Was it an issue with QA? Not filing bug reports properly? Who knows? Who knows? It can be any number of things or a multitude of these things. And yeah, it's like, okay, Embracer Group takes over a bunch of game studios. Sure, that's one problem. Volition going down, I don't think is more. It has anything to do necessarily with Embracer Group, especially because if Saints Row, if the developers, Volition was as good as they were making Saints Row 3 and 4, then they would have made the new Saints Row just fine. It wouldn't have had these problems. It would have sold like hotcakes, just like the previous ones, but it didn't. So clearly, we're attributing some things here. That just because a game company has the same name doesn't mean it's filled with the same people that made the games that we love. And that's true for every single game studio. Do you think the people that worked on Witcher 3, a game that we all love, are still there at CD Projekt Red? No, most of them have moved on and started their own studios here in Poland. Because, well, there were a lot of production problems with Witcher 3, but it's also just because people move on. They learn new things. They want to start their own studio. They want to try their own thing. That's what we're doing. And it's the same with Volition. It's the same with Blizzard. The people made Diablo 2, the people that made StarCraft, they're not there anymore. A lot of them are really old. They've retired. They maybe have their own studio, whatever. I'm going to try and participate in a game jam with Game Maker Studio. That sounds like an excellent idea. Absolutely excellent.
He orders a steak and you say, all right, you want a steak? Here's a tomato. You're gonna be done.
Here's a tomato.
Like, bro, like, this is like, we need another cook. Like, we need somebody in here that can make steaks.
Yeah.
This guy just keeps giving everybody tomatoes.
Same with BioWare
wasn't
too.
The only studio with this business plan. Microsoft merged with Activision in 2022 and has been on its own consolidation push.
The biggest companies with the most sustainability and diversified revenue streams are buying up as much of the industry as they possibly can, seemingly in order to buy up talent and to buy up IP. So
I think that there is a greater goal with this, but let me let him finish.
That they can spin that off into as many profitable ventures as possible.
That's common.
I think that this exists on a meta level as well. So I don't think that
that's not unique to the game industry either.
On is sales of video games. I think that it also exists inside of a scope of being able to control the production and distribution of the games. So, for example, Steam obviously is a huge competitor for any other individual studio trying to make their own launcher. And very few studios have been able to make their own launcher and have it be successful in like a big way. Obviously, I think that the biggest success case is, like BattleNet, right, with Blizzard. But then you also have the Riot launcher, and then you have Ubisoft. Like, they're all making their own launchers.
But people generally use them because they have to. I don't think there are very, very many people at this point that prefer any of those launchers over Steam. They use them because they have to.
And
it's a new
the more games that are on that launcher, the more that launcher can act as a market replacement to Steam. So being able to control the launcher allows them to avoid the 30% payment fee that Steam requires. And it also gives them other abilities that they can advertise without any restrictions from Steam. They can do whatever they want with it, and they can control the space completely. So that's another big component that gets people to want to consolidate IPs and put all of them together, because it creates a higher value proposition for a user going into buying Game Pass if they know that they can get Diablo 4.
It's true.
And they can also download BattleNet, and it has all these other games in it that's like filled to the brim with advertisements, right? That's the reason why it's happening. So, like, this exists in terms of the scope of the games, but it exists on something that's above that. It's the distribution of the games. And having enough games allows you to control, to a degree, where that distribution comes from.
Yeah, and I think there was a time where EA's launcher was actually, to some extent, better than Steam. This was a long time ago. And EA had a lot of good games that... It was worth having Origin open. It was worth having people added to your Origins friends list. This is back in the day of like Battlefield 3, right? Battlefield 3 and 4. I just think they dropped the ball, and it's like Steam overtook it, and I think the only people that really pushed Steam to become better was Epic, and that was because you have Fortnite. And the only reason the only reason I think the Epic launcher became so successful was because of Fortnite. Even with the free game giveaways that they were spending a lot of money on, people only use the Epic launcher because they had to. Like, oh well, I have to use it for Fortnite. I have to use it for Borderlands 3 because it launches in exclusive access on Epic. There's just, these don't provide better value than Steam, and people are willing to put up with some of Steam's bullshit the same way they're willing to put up with some of bullshit in other areas that they're just kind of forced because this is the only option they have. But Valve is owned majority share by Gaben, right? This there is I think there is private investment into Valve, but it is not a controlling share, unlike when Embracer Group comes in and purchases the entire studio. They might purchase the controlling share or a majority share to some extent, or I think even in some cases a 100% share. So they pretty much own the studio. And the reason that companies go along with this is understandable. It's like your company is valued at 200 million, but company wants to buy you out. They have to buy out that full 200 million. So it's like, yeah, well, I'm a manager here. I own 10% of the shares. Buy me out. I make a shit ton of money.
A game developer who did not work for Embracer, but has a unique claim to fame.
I was laid off twice in 1 year, yes.
Another great example, no, not too bad. Another great example is
if you just stop working at AAA studios. Like, I get it. Sometimes there isn't a better option, right? I'm saying this knowing that there sometimes isn't a better option. And especially because you might be looked down upon, or you might be considered overqualified if you're a AAA dev for some other smaller studios. It's rare, but it happens. If you know that the AAA scene is so unstable, just stop working for AAA studios. Like I said at the start of this, it is the best time in the world to start an indie studio right now. The money is still there. There are still publishers there. There are still investors. If that's the route that you want to go, you can avoid all the bullshit from the AAA.
Is HoYoverse. Somebody brought this up. MiHoYo just recently made their own launcher. So now you get Honkai Star Rail, Genshin Impact, Honkai Impact 3rd, and Zenless Zone Zero all on the same launcher. Why is that? So they don't have to pay Steam.
The big thing about game companies is...
Well, they also don't need it. Like, if your game is just popular enough, you don't need to go on Steam. Like, if people want to play Genshin, and people want to play Genshin, whether it's on Steam or not, I don't think it being on Steam is necessarily going to bring in a significant number of new players. But it's... I wonder, do you have to pay Steam for... I guess you would have to pay Steam for microtransactions if they're linked through Steam, right? So if, for instance, the I forget the name of them in Genshin, like the gems, right? You can buy those. They probably have to, you buy them through Steam, and then Steam would, Valve would take 30%. So yeah, I guess they're trying to avoid that. But also, I mean, there might be some benefits to using their own launcher, apart from just consolidation and saving money. They can provide some other benefits, or easy switching between games, or maybe some sort of linking between games.
Become bigger,
there's
a certain amount of growth that those shareholders are expecting.
And to achieve that growth, game companies...
People look at the number, usually the number for a lot of people is 8%.
A few things.
I didn't know that.
They'll buy up studios to achieve a greater market share.
Yes.
They'll rush games that have no business being released.
True.
At the expense of inhumane working hours for their staff.
Yeah.
They'll cram in as many microtransactions as possible.
Primo gems, thank you. Yeah,
whatever new monetization strategy your competitors
YouTube's becoming usable again. You wait for uBlock Origin to update. Fucking YouTube, dude.
Yep.
The video game industry consolidation is leading...
And this is also another problem, is that a lot of high-end leadership is that, like, moving a company in a direction, you are still accountable to shareholders collectively that are not as informed as you are.
Yep.
So when a video game company isn't making a lot of money and
That's
the
fucked up,
shareholders are
Implodey.
not happy, it's very difficult to communicate how battle passes could be negative in the long term for the brand. It looks like he may commit suicide.
Hey,
Suicide is bad.
thank you, Twitch. Thank you for the follow. Welcome to the stream.
Shareholder doesn't have any negative in the long term for the brand because a shareholder doesn't have any long-term investment into a brand.
Well, also, a lot of shareholders in this case, like Embracer Group, these are not game developers. I mean, you can have other game dev studios buy a stake in another company or even buy up a company. You know, individuals that actually know how games work, and if you told them, yeah, we don't want to do a battle pass, they're like, yeah, we don't want that either because we know how it would affect the industry. For them, it's all about the bottom line. It's all about profit. They're the suits. And there's nothing wrong with a suit who defers to you for the best decision, right? Somebody can buy, let's say, 20% in your company, and they're like, okay, you know, we're looking for some more revenue from your company. Have you thought about doing this or this? I've heard those are good things to make money, but I will defer to you on what you want to do to help get us to that point. But most of them don't. Most of them are in that position because they have an obligation to their shareholders or their investors. And so they got in that position because they're good at making money. And unfortunately, battle passes, microtransactions, all this bullshit that people don't like on large do make money for the companies. It comes at the cost of your soul. And unfortunately, a lot of people are willing to do that. Embracer, yet all they embrace is layoffs and studio closures. Shows that they want short-term profits, they can all sell stock quickly. Yes, industry and the stock market do not work well together. No, it's not really an industry. You're right. Like the industry it's very long-term. It's a slow burn kind of industry where, you know, for us, if somebody invested in Microraptor Games, it's like, you better be ready not to see profits for at least 3 years. Okay, simple as that. I can't magically finish Cauldron Chronicles. I can't magically put a team together. Even if I got 100 people, you know, tomorrow it's like now we have growing pains. We aren't even organized enough. We aren't prepared to start this development. 100 people is too much. You know, now the scope of the game is too small for 100 people. So a lot of people will just be without work, and that's wasting money. You know, it's not something you can solve just by throwing more people on it. Very few things are, right? You can't just throw more cooks into a kitchen and your food is being prepared faster. There is an optimal number for what's being made. Stock market had special orders for long-term industries like game development where you selling stock is bound to releases, or like many, your investment that would do a lot more. Yeah, that would be an interesting experiment to run for sure. I agree with that.
From a shareholder perspective, they're just going to buy this stock, and then when the stock goes down, when it starts going down, they're going to sell the stock. Yes. So what happens for them is that they don't really care about the long-term effects of what these business decisions are, because by that time they're on to the next fucking thing that they're invested in. And here's what makes it even worse, is that a lot of the executives are the same thing. They have quarterly earnings reports, and they're min-maxing quarterly earnings reports where they get big payouts. And then as soon as they do enough of those, then they leave the company after they end on a high note, and then they let the ship sink after that.
Well, even beyond that too, they will specifically move releases to align with quarterly earnings to make themselves look better. You know, they're playing a game beyond this with your product, with your game that you want to buy. They are playing games with those. They just don't care, and it's all because it's all about meeting these expectations. Because if they don't, they can be ousted by the shareholders, right? They can be put under pressure. They can be moved. They can be just let go entirely. Often with massive, $1 million severance fee or severance packages that could have paid for another 10 to 20 people for a year. In which case the game could have been finished in a better quality, and this never would have happened in the first place. I mean, like, game dev is the only industry which is affected. No, it isn't. It's not. It is not the only industry, but it is the industry that we know the best on this channel.
So you have a situation where there's like no sense of long-term accountability for the direction of a business. And that causes people to make a lot of very, very rash and very consumer unfriendly, in a lot of cases, decisions. And I think that's what's happening a lot here too.
To less risk. You're going to see less games that do new things, that are engaging with new ideas.
And I think that you want
She's
to talk
right.
about games. Oh yeah, games are so bad. Look at movies.
Yep.
Oh my God.
Yep.
Like,
It's a very
it's
similar
like,
industry.
Unless you are like one of probably 10 directors in the world, the amount of movies
saw that
you can
implode. It's
probably
fucked
get
up.
greenlit now went from this in like, I don't know, 1998, and now it's like this. It's like, okay, so do you want to make a superhero movie or do you want to make a movie about cars? Oh my God. Like, that's it.
He's right.
That's the only thing
He's
to do.
right.
And so unless you're Christopher...
He's right. And he's about to say, like, unless you're Christopher Nolan, right? But I was watching, I don't know if you guys know the movie Chicago, right? I got drunk and I listened to some of the music of that. Very good. 2002 film, right? About, some women on Murderer's Row. It's a musical. But it's like, they just don't make these movies. I just can't see this existing these days because it's too interesting. It's too good. It's too much of a risk, I think. I guess, okay, I'll say this. I think the new Joker movie actually is a pretty big risk. I think that this is in a similar vein. I mean, this is a wild idea for a movie. Especially for a sequel, for a movie that didn't need a sequel. And I have a lot of high hopes for this. I think it's going to be pretty good. But there are just very few movies like this that are actually challenging the viewer, maybe putting them in uncomfortable positions, making them think. It's just sad. Like, this is like we get a movie like this once every couple years now, whereas we used to get multiple movies a year that were like this. People were going to the movies all the time for new releases. I mean, I can just look up maybe like movie releases. What was like a good year? What was a good year that we can use here? Maybe like 2009. Was 2000? I see 2012 and X-Men Origins. Maybe 2009 wasn't the greatest. Top 2009 picks. Hold on, let's go back to 2008. We just don't need to be risky to be good. That's kind of true. Look, Barbie and the Diamond Castle. Oh my God, what a movie! Not all risky movies were great. No, you're right. Some of the best movies are some of the safest. That's true. What like IMDb top movies? Interstellar seemed pretty safe. I think the way Interstellar was shot was great. I think Interstellar's story was nothing. It wasn't innovative, but it was good. Like, it was relatively safe, but it was good. It had some really good scenes. Dune 1 and 2 as well, they were both massive success. It's true, but they were based on an existing IP. I mean, if we can think of, like, something that was freshly written, I guess. That's about how it was conveyed. Yeah, for sure. I think the 2000s were pretty good. I mean, we had Dark Knight, Lord of the Rings, Return of the King. I mean, we had all the Lord of the Rings, right? Inception, 2010. The 1990s too were holy shit. I mean, like, the 1990s were popping off. Shawshank Redemption, Schindler's List, Pulp Fiction, Forrest Gump, Fight Club, Matrix, Goodfellas, Seven. I love Seven. Silence of the Lambs, Saving Private Ryan. Maybe it was the 90s. Black Hawk Down, Gladiator. Oh, fuck yeah, dude. It's like maybe like 90s and 2000s were really where, I guess, this like a current era of movies, right? Because I love like 50s, 60s, 70s. Some amazing movies in 50s, 60s, and 70s, especially also 40s. I love 40s music or movies. But 90s and 2000s, at least, when I was growing up, holy shit, those were good. Oh, Parasite. Yeah. Parasite was great. And we still get good movies. Like I said, Dune, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. I think Joker was excellent. Best movies of last 5 years. I mean Oppenheimer, but it's Christopher Nolan, right? New Christopher Nolan film? Okay, pre-ordering my tickets. Spider-Verse movies were quite artistically innovative. Yeah, I 100% agree with that. This is somebody's own list, I think. Revenant. I do remember Revenant. Revenant was good. Hacksaw Ridge, Logan. I really like when they take superheroes and they do something new with them. And I felt like, Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy, exceptional. I think Logan, fantastic. Mad Max Fury Road, that was 2015. It just kind of feels like around the last 10 years really is when it's just been last 5 to 10 years it's been pretty bad. Pretty bad for movies. There's been a drought.
For Nolan, Steven Spielberg, or Guillermo del Toro, there's no way you're going to get this much funding.
Yeah.
And I bet even those guys have trouble getting funding.
But no, I don't think it's a funding issue with movies. I don't think it's a funding issue. I just think that they know they can make drivel. They can make another superhero movie, and it will make money. It will be profitable. Simple as that. Even the worst ones will still be profitable. Like, why should they try? Why should they take a risk on something that could flop when they can for sure make a superhero movie that is safe and will make them money? Okay, Life of Pi is it will never now remind me of them causing the bankruptcy of a VFX studio and laughing about it at the Oscars. What the fuck that happened? Jesus Christ.
Is.
These gaming conglomerates are taking a page from Hollywood by milking established franchises for all their worth. Beholden to shareholders, it's not enough to make a game that makes some money and pays its workers and leadership a decent wage. Shareholders expect constant growth. In other words, an unsustainable return on investment. Things didn't start.
Well, constant growth is guaranteed, assuming that the market stays the same because of inflation.
I think that constant growth is possible if you have live service games and multiple games being released in a year, right? And that's where Ubisoft and EA can succeed with this, relatively safely, but other smaller studios cannot. From those FOMO mechanics, which ones?
Right, like naturally that would be the case. But the problem is that the growth, like if you're at 15%, people want you to go to 20.
Yes.
If you're at 20, they want you to go to 25. There is never enough.
Yep.
Start unraveling for Embracer.
Everybody wants to invest in Nvidia.
Honestly, we didn't hear about the $2 billion deal until it fell through.
Embracer is a publicly traded company, but one particular investment partner helped continue their industry consolidation.
Yeah. Embracer Group had a $1 billion investment from Savvy Games Group.
Savvy Games Group, for the record, is a giant in the gaming space. They bought huge stakes in EA, Take-Two Interactive, and spent over $4 billion alone to buy a mobile game company called Scopely. They're also
I've heard of
Scopely. I even
Scopely.
thought about doing this myself, right?
That's wild.
Like I was thinking like maybe in like 20 years, 10 years or something like that, I could do investment capital for games. Because like I don't know a lot about it, right? But I know enough about it to know that it's like I think it actually like there's a lot of potential there. There's a tremendous amount of potential there.
Yes, there is.
And I think that obviously like
sure COVID has resulted in a decrease in the amount of money being made in the industry, but I think it's a temporary dip. It's just like COVID, before it was like, hold on, I can just paint it. Time for some NFT work. This is a relative example. This is not the exact chart. But before COVID it was like this, right? And then COVID hits and it's like this. And then COVID stops and it's like there was this plateauing almost. It was like this, and I think it's just gonna go like this. I think that's really what it's gonna be. So like in the end, sure, this looks massive and this looks bad, right? This dip, but the line is still straight. So people are not gonna stop playing games. They're not gonna stop buying games unless they run out of money, which, you know, that's a separate issue. But the entertainment industry is very stable as a whole. But this just looks worrying to investors because, oh no, we think that the people are going to stop playing games and we're losing money. We got to cut back so that if this goes like this, that we don't get fucked, right? It's not going to go like that. It's not. Oh no, our short-term growth is stagnated. That's like, dude, if you have $4 billion to spend buying a studio, if you have this much, and you have confidence that they can make money in the future, depending on the size of the company, it doesn't take a lot to keep it going, to keep the lights on, right? I've started games try to take up most of your time, so you have a situation where you have tens of games that are interesting to some player, but because of FOMO, they have to decide which to play instead of spreading out their playtime over all games, eventually benefiting more studios. Yeah. I think I play a lot of live service games, right? I play an MMO RPG, I play RuneScape. I get it, you know, but that's where I choose to spend my time. I play PoE sometimes, that's a live service game. But I don't have time for multiple of these. I don't. I have to choose like one or two at most. And it's hard.
What the fuck do I know, right? I've taken, I don't know, 5 finance classes in college. Like,
the season structure is nice, yeah.
They have a master's in it, and they've been working in the field for 20 years. So, like, think about the way that they're seeing it, right? And so they are getting super, super heavy into video games. Like, you're seeing, like billion-dollar funds that are being put into gaming now, even now.
Arm of the Public Investment Fund, the wealth fund for Saudi
the oil money.
Yep.
Arabia's royal family. Savvy's billion-dollar investment in Embracer happened in June of 2022, and shortly after, Embracer spent $395 million on the rights to Lord of the Rings and bought another round of studios looking to grow their portfolio
that's
for
crazy.
their investors.
Savvy Games Group intended to invest another $2 billion in there, and that fell through.
Up until late last night, we had an amazing cash flow. I think that's history now, so it's not that relevant.
For undisclosed reasons, the deal with Savvy Games imploded, and Embracer's shopping spree was suddenly looking like a huge mistake.
But hey, this is business, and I know shareholders and other stakeholders expect me to win every battle. This was a big one. And we didn't.
Oh, you know, it's like, I love the, what are you going to do? What are you going to do?
To win this
But
one,
it's like, it's like public investment company has its shareholders. A lot of the people that probably invest in their company are other investment companies, and they have shareholders. It all just goes down the line. And yeah, I mean, if this is what the point of this video is to say, like, the moment you do it, you've lost. The moment you've gone public, you've lost. The moment that you have an investment group that doesn't understand games and has a controlling share of your company, you're fucked. Macroeconomics is a pyramid scheme. I can't argue with that. And that's just one of the reasons. Like, I've worked for a company that was public, and it sucked. It sucked because we had obligations, and there were a lot of things that I couldn't say because it would have been manipulating the stock price, right? It's like, okay, so being truthful to customers is manipulating the stock price. Great. I hate it. That's why we're not gonna go public. We're gonna stay private. It's a much tougher journey to get there, but it'll allow me to say whatever the fuck I want, and trust me, I do. If you haven't noticed, and it'll allow me to do whatever I want and pivot to wherever we need to pivot.
I'm sure we will
take
win,
the time we need.
Many of the future battles.
For sure.
And that's where Embracer went bad.
We got like an email at like 9:05 or something for an 11 o'clock all hands meeting. The people from Gearbox thankfully just rip off.
As long as you don't state weird shit like John Blow. Is that the one I'm thinking of? I like Jonathan Blow. Wait, is that him? He's not the guy for The Witness, right? He's had some weird takes before, but I think he's a really talented programmer. I know some people don't like him. I could mainly because he is a bit political online. He has some super weird takes. He does, but I mean, doesn't everybody? Doesn't everybody have some weird? I have all my hot takes. I know people want to cancel me for some of the edgy jokes that I made on, like, Discord 8 years ago. We talked about that yesterday. Who cares? Like, a lot of that shit doesn't represent me anymore. A lot of it still does. It's fine, whatever.
The Band-Aid, and we're like, yep, we're closing the studio. One of the guys who I think worked there since Volition opened was like, well, that's 30 years down the drain. It's hard to watch the thing you've been a part of for, you know, probably a majority of his life just get destroyed, and through no fault of his own.
People who have been laid off from Embracer and
Rough time in the industry, Bidenomics, everyone does Bidenomics, that's why it's this way outside of the USA. The only one that I can really agree with, like, it's a rough time in the industry. But he's very clearly conservative. Yeah, he's a conservative voice. He's not as crazy as other conservative voices, though. It's just like, yeah, you know what, he's gonna say these things. He's not extreme, but he is very much a Republican, right? So, I mean, I don't know, it balances out. You have other developers that are very, very obviously Democrat and say some really weird things online too. I will say though, conservative game devs tend to attack players and gamers way less than liberal game devs. That's my observation. Weird to say something as dumb as that given how smart he is. Yeah, it is weird, isn't it? But that's kind of what politics does to people's brains, I think.
and elsewhere are devastated. They're seeing their
like a religion
crumble in a way that they haven't seen before.
Well, the reason why you're seeing this happen also is because the truth is that the video game industry grew unsustainably during COVID.
Yes.
And I think that the tech industry in general grew unsustainably. So when you compound the retraction of people going back outside and not as many people being online. Now, if you look at the graph, COVID was a huge spike, but whenever it balanced back out, it didn't go back to where it was before. We are still at a much higher degree of people playing games,
yes.
people being online. Like, I
exactly.
think it was huge, and it has been, right? It's been huge, but it obviously went down. And so a lot of these companies scaled unsustainably, whether this is Meta, Twitter, Polygon. I think that even they did layoffs, right? Maybe it was just Kotaku.
1% of the
everything
positions on LinkedIn are junior positions.
Scaled
Junior, especially in game dev,
and
sucks.
Also, think about
it's fucked up,
right? And also content organizations. Like, think about like 100 Thieves, FaZe, a lot of these really big TSM, a lot of these really big esports teams also scaled unsustainably.
Well, it's like,
and they had to drop. Like,
if I have a limited amount of money right now, because it's really, it's a very competitive market, right, in game dev, and I assume that all tech, it's really hard for me to get money. And it's like, if I have if I have $3 million, $4 million for my budget, I don't have a lot of leeway to hire somebody who's junior, and it sucks, but it's kind of the reality. As much as I'd love to train a junior, because I think juniors are an incredible part of any company. Hiring somebody, teaching them off of your own values, goals, and software, and the way that you work as a team, they end up being the most loyal, most capable employees in the long term. And that's just a fact. So, juniors are a great addition to any team. However, they cost money and time to train and to get up to a speed that is self-sufficient, where you can give them a task and not have to look over their shoulder very often. And it's like, yeah, if you're strapped for time, if you have quarterly earnings that you have to make, you don't really have an extra quarter that you can say, let's hire a couple juniors, we'll train them up, and everything will be hunky-dory. The problem is that the junior title is primarily a statement about years of experience in the industry. True. What it's worth, they could be more efficient than a senior in some given situation. 100% true. But POV of employer, yeah, it's a risk. Yeah. No, you're 100% right. I also, for instance, when we started hiring people for Colton Chronicles, for Microraptor Games as a whole, we won't have senior regular positions or juniors. You are simply designer. You are simply programmer. We might have certain positions like lead programmer, right? So this is the person in charge of the programming team. But if you're a junior, you're just listed as programmer, right? And you have your expertise, you have your own interests, your own goals. People work with you. You work with other people. It's just how it is. I want to get rid of that hierarchy and this whole notion of you are a junior, therefore you have to do what the senior says, or the senior is better than you. Like, we do need some hierarchy, some of this is the lead programmer, and therefore they're going to be managing the tasks and delegating. But when it comes to who is better, there is no better. You are a programmer for Microraptor Games. That's who you are. And you can contribute in any way that you want. You can take any feature that you want and own it and be the feature owner for that, and then rely on your colleagues and your friends to help augment your skill set, because you might be very good at one thing but very bad at many other things. Just for a smaller studio, which I guess you are, yeah, and we want to maintain that way. We want to be maximum 15 people full-time, in my opinion. Arcade support, when you have like lots of employees, yeah, you're definitely right. There is a certain need for it. Although I think that some companies, they put too much stock in hierarchy. Like, they have the hierarchy, but then it becomes a hierarchy also of communication. And if you put bad people into some of those positions, you might have juniors, for instance, afraid of speaking up about something that they might see or know better about, because of a fear of, well, I'm not supposed to speak to this person who's the project lead, because I have to speak to my lead first, and then he will take it to the other leads, and then they will talk with the project lead or something. Just shit like that, right? It's like it just gets muddled. And for a smaller company like me, I just want to be like, yeah, you want to talk to lead programmer, like right there, just send him a DM. I don't care if you're new and you just started, if you're a junior. That's the person who knows what you're wanting to know, so go talk to him. I don't know.
Like, tons of people, like triple digits in some cases, numbers of people. So this is what's happened in also scaled unsustainably, and they had to drop like tons of people, like triple digits in some cases, numbers of people. So this is what's happened in a lot of cases, right? And I think that for video games, that's also a very big component for it. And a big reason, I want to say the biggest reason, is because the games that these people are producing are not of a high enough quality to justify the investment.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about like Larian Studios, right, and how they said that they didn't expect Baldur's Gate 3 to sell as well as they did, and that to me was a very important statement that a lot of players will overlook as being a crucial decision-making factor for Larian Studios. Larian Studios has hundreds of employees, right? This is a company that is costing tens of millions of dollars per year to run. I think we calculated it once. It was definitely at least 25 or 30 million a year to run. So when they're thinking, okay, we don't think this is going to sell as well as some of our other games. We've already been spending a lot of our own money on this, right? Because it was self-funded. So all of Divinity money was spent on it. And we're about to go up against Starfield for release date, 2 single-player RPG games. Although, one of them is co-op, right? But most of the people who play Baldur's Gate are probably playing single-player. They're like, well, we need to release it earlier so that we have the market for a month. And they said that the game was ready, but it wasn't ready. It was clearly very, very buggy, especially Act 3 at the time of release, but it makes sense why they did that, why they might have cut out the more of the upper city or other parts of planned narrative content, especially for characters. It's because they didn't think the game was going to make as much money. They cost tens of millions of dollars to run a year. Pushing a game back by even one quarter is a significant investment for the company. Significant. So yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I just wish they were honest about it, because that's kind of what I assume happened behind the doors. I also assume there was some issue with Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast. Well, that's Hasbro, right? So I don't know. I think there was multiple variables here, and they probably can't talk about it due to NDA. But there was clearly some strife, and they have no interest in making Baldur's Gate 4, probably for a lot of those internal reasons. They even paid for the D&D license, which is just astonishing. Yeah, it's absolutely wild. You think they could pitch the idea to Wizards of the Coast or to Hasbro, and they'd be like, "Yeah, here, have the license. You don't need to pay for it. You clearly make good RPGs. You can bring in a lot of money to D&D just by making the game." It's wild. Hasbro just made interesting decisions that they not want to sell Wizards of the Coast D&D after the BG3 release. I don't know. I mean, I'm glad Baldur's Gate 3 did well, but I think there was... I don't know why they thought that it wasn't going to sell as well as it did. It's weird. But I think maybe that's also why Larian Studios wants to not work on Baldur's Gate 4, is because of these external pressures to release a certain game the way that they may not have wanted to release it, or to create it in a way they didn't want to create it. And they can go back to Divinity, or they can make their own new IP that is entirely... At this point, I hope Larian Studios has enough money to say, fuck this license shit, we're going to make our own games again, and we are going to be beholden to nobody. I wanted to give the license to Tencent. Honestly, as much as I do not like to say it would be a good thing, IP. I think Tencent is sometimes much better for certain studios than like Embracer Group has been. Early Tencent was a little shaky, but there've been a couple cases where they've bought studios, and yeah, they let those studios do their thing. They get games. They get that it's a long-term investment, and I think they have enough live service products under their belt that they can sustain investing in studios that make the irregular, premium releases, right? I think studios do something good, they love them. Yeah. I agree.
I would argue it is investors not knowing the market. Instead of focusing on making better games as well as a server radio, they thought they could just print money. Well, it's because they do print money. So let me explain. This is a very rudimentary, and I'm probably oversimplifying, but let me just do my best.
Okay.
Take 100 shots. You miss 99. You hit one. The one pays for the other 99, and then you write the 99 off as a business loss.
True.
Clever use of game mechanics.
There's some truth to that.
Last year, there were a little bit over 10,000 layoffs in the video game industry. 5,000.
And people bring up Trump. This actually is what Trump did. Trump lost it. That's why he didn't pay any taxes. He didn't pay any taxes because of something called a carryover loss.
Those were through Embracer Group, which is significant.
In a similar move, Microsoft ended up laying off 1,900 Activision and Xbox employees.
It's really, really hard for the people that have been laid off to find new jobs.
I also think that Twitter firing a bunch of people and maintaining its functionality, a lot of people might shit on Elon Musk personally.
They do.
And publicly.
They
do.
But
I bet there's probably a lot of CEOs and guys in leadership positions that saw that happen, and they were like, write that down.
Yeah, with getting rid of like 80% of staff. I mean, there certainly have been some issues with Twitter, both at that time when those individuals were let go and currently. But you can't deny Twitter is still running. Like, it has its problems, but it's still running. So clearly some of these employees might not have been very necessary for keeping the company going. Now, but for games, with these 10,000 losses, sure, it sucks. But that's also because a lot of these jobs were added. And it's I'm going to say it again. I've said it like 3 times this stream already. If you are laid off in game dev, stabilize your life as best you can and work on games. Start a new studio with some friends. It's the best time, I think, to start an indie studio. It's the best time. Would it be possible for a company to go half public where they have investors but without a lot of say? Yes. Where they primarily invest for dividends, the company itself always holds over 50? Yes. Yeah, I know that that Valve is like that, for instance. Now, I don't know if there are... It is still a private company, right? It's a private LLC. Or it was formerly an LLC. It's a private corporation now. But Gabe owns over 50%. So there are other investors, private investors, and these might be other companies or individuals. But Gabe owns over 50% of the company. And so therefore, if he says that the company's going to do something, he can have the company do something, right? But it also means that they can do whatever they want. Essentially, they aren't beholden to shareholders and when they expect certain profits, because these companies don't have controlling share over it, and they probably can't oust Gabe. They probably wouldn't anyway. I don't know if there's a good, maybe like, I'm curious who owns like controlling shares of like Ubisoft and stuff. I don't know if there's a way to look it up easily. I have no idea how you would even be able to start looking up who owns these shares. Oh, the Guillemot family owns 14%, Tencent owns like 10%. So, in this case, because there's such a, the ownership is stretched so thin and nobody owns a direct controlling share, they have like a board, I imagine. And I'm not an expert either, so, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, either here or in the YouTube comments. They have a board of investors, and they could push somebody out, or they could vote against even what Yves wants, who's the CEO. So, in this case, if the board wants them to make more money and isn't happy with the way things are going, I think they could oust him in a vote if they aren't happy with it. And there's a lot of there's 5 red triangles here, which is not very good. But also, I don't know if Ubisoft has had any big releases recently. Net change in cash minus 51 million. Oof. They did have a lot of net income though. They had a loss in 23, but they've had net income in the last couple quarters. Stock price has gone down though. It ain't 2018 anymore. New AC might help. It depends on how well it sells. When it eventually releases, it depends on how well it sells. I'll be curious to see, because I don't think it's going to sell as much as Origins. I don't know. I don't know how to feel about it.
Yeah.
Especially with Ghost of Tsushima, right? Because when Assassin's Creed Origins came out, or what was like the Viking one? I don't remember the names, and the Greek one. I think that these don't have as many direct competitors for the genre and the setting nearly as much as Shadows does with Ghost of Tsushima. And Ghost of Tsushima doesn't have nearly as much controversy, or like any controversy, as Shadows. And whether you agree with the controversy or not, the controversy is going to impact sales to some extent, either positively or negatively.
They're in this pool now that, if we're counting last year, 20,000 people were laid off in total from last year to right now in a year and a half. People are unable to pay rent. They live in cities that they relocated to for these jobs. Cities that are very,
I
very
get that it
expensive.
sucks.
They have families.
That's a very good point. Yeah, people that get relocated and then they lose their job, that's horrible.
Yeah, the relocation
medical
issue
conditions.
sucks.
Yeah, it sucks.
And I get that this sucks, but you also have to ask yourself, like, what do you want to happen? And I don't want to put the blame on them at all, but if you know that you're going to go to work for a AAA company that is owned by another company, right? Like if you go to work at Blizzard, you are beholden to Daddy Microsoft, okay? Just know that there is that possibility that if your company is doing poorly or needs to be restructured, it's not the managers of Blizzard that are going to save you. They can't. They got daddies that they got to suckle the teat of as well. So return to office was interesting considering the salaries. I can understand wanting individuals to. I think it's a company's right to ask people to work in office, but I think that there are multiple mismanagements within Blizzard and of course within Microsoft that are causing a lot of these problems. And the simple fact is that I don't think Blizzard is making the games that are selling as well or doing as well as they used to. And it's because different people are in charge, different people are making the game, the industry is a bit different, a lot of different factors. So, again, we take a look, like they mentioned Volition Group with Saints Row. Well, guess what? Saints Row sold like dog shit. The new one sold like dog shit compared to Saints Row 3 and 4. I'm not surprised that a company that makes bad games is going to have problems. Now, whether they made bad games because it was poorly developed, because they had bad production, or because it was Embracer Group that was pushing this in some way, we don't know. It's probably multiple of these factors combined. All we know is that AAA has been putting out some not so great games recently, and it's not surprising to me that a lot of these companies are going to cut individuals to help save money. Hey, Emily's, what I missed today? Oh, we're talking about private equities taking over gaming. Hiring out-of-state people and forcing them to office with a salary that does not work for Irving region just does not go down well, though. You are not wrong. Yes. Yeah, 100%. 100%. And I've been in situations like that where I almost got hired for an EA position, and the amount of money would have been really difficult because I would have had to move to, I think it was south of San Francisco. Let me look at San Fran real quick. I wouldn't have had to live in this city. I would have had to live in, it was like in this area, like San Bruno, San Mateo. Somewhere around here. San Francisco. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad I didn't take it because I'll tell you, San Francisco is poop. Quite literally and figuratively. You need like 200k in San Fran area just to live. Yeah, I mean, thankfully I wouldn't have had to live down there, but this is also pretty expensive, I think. I've been there before. I've been there twice. And both times it was an experience. Very bittersweet. Bring up the San Fran poop map. Hey, Panzerwolf Alpha. Okay. San Fran poop map. I love looking at it. This is a map of all of the reported human feces in San Francisco. Jesus is right? No, they need Jesus. So yeah, it's a city. And I'll tell you what, the cool places are like here. The pier is all right, and up here. Getting out anywhere out. Wait, what? Just poop here? What? Interesting. Interesting choice of pooping location. Yeah, it's this is a city. This is a city. It exists. It was a floater. Oh my god, I love it.
They're losing their health care.
During the height of the pandemic, people like me, we used social distancing as an excuse to 100% Pokemon Snap or perfect our Animal Crossing island.
Yeah, I'm
they may
still
have
doing
even
that.
convinced a few friends to
I don't know about you guys, but when there was the lockdowns, I was just complaining. I was just bitching all the time. I was like, this fucking sucks. I had to sit inside my house and work on Darkest Dungeon for like 3 years. It was horrible. I hated it. I want to work with people in person. You know, I moved to Poland. One of the reasons was that I was hoping I could work in studios with other people, and it was terrible working from home, especially for a game designer. Glad I didn't have to commute during lockdown, though. I mean, that's fair. Thankfully, I could walk to work, so for me, it was like, yeah, I can just walk to work. This is great. But I hated remote work. Communication was terrible. People, you know, people that I had contact with and I could talk about with game design during like lunches were now, you know, I couldn't do that. They were just working and they didn't have any free time, and it's not like we can just eat and have a chat. It was bad. Commuting to uni is 1 hour one way. Oh my god.
to pick up a game for the first time in years. Of course that wouldn't last. I still have not completed Pokemon Snap, and my Steam library is overflowing with games I don't have time to play anymore.
Yeah.
That's how it is for
Any
everybody.
executive who actually
Hey, I saw my game. Saw a game I worked on. Look.
Yeah.
Right here. I did this. Well, I didn't do this, chat. I worked on this. What's that game where people hide stuff in real world? Like keys to some puzzle? Yeah, it's like geocaching, right? And it leads to another one. Geocaching is
any
fun.
executive
Good for
who
kids
actually
too.
understands business knew this was a bubble and could see this happening. And I think
Shouldn't
I
adding
think that
locations
also
for
a
playing
lot of these
game of
people,
geocaching.
they know that it's a bubble
Geopooping.
and they don't care. So, like, if you look at it from an executive perspective, you hire on
Yeah, I agree with
1,000
Asmon.
people that you're not going to need, and then whenever you don't need them,
I agree with Asmon. It's like they don't care that it's a bubble. It's like they will hire people to make the money now, and then when the money isn't coming in, they'll just get rid of it. And if the money comes back in, they'll just hire people back because they know that they'll be there. They know that they need jobs. They don't give a shit. It's all about the numbers for them. It doesn't really reflect reality. It is more dependent on quantitative easing, narrative, AI. Yield curve, it's capital vacuum to keep liquidity from causing inflation. You definitely seem to know what you're talking about. All I can talk about is like some basics of it.
you just fire them all. Easy.
Yes.
Done, right? So if you look at it from the way they see it, it makes perfect sense. So it only seems like a bad thing because you're not looking at it with the priorities that they are.
in the most generous reading possible, receded more
Lazy
than
fence.
they thought it would. But I don't think a single person who ramped up a ton of hiring during the pandemic thought that they wouldn't have to lay off a single person.
Great point. He brings up a really great...
That's true.
Totally, yep, absolutely.
Whether you're angry about laid off workers, canceled games, or prematurely released games, Lars Wingefors, CEO of Embracer, laid out.
I actually don't think Starfield was prematurely released. If you ask me, I don't think it was prematurely released. The game that I think was prematurely released was Baldur's Gate 3. I found Starfield less buggy than Baldur's Gate 3 on release. That's just my personal experience. I had bugs for sure, but they weren't nearly as game-breaking as Baldur's Gate 3. No Man's Sky was definitely released way too early. I don't know why Sony allowed that. It's wild. Fallout 76 is a good one. Cyberpunk, yep. And Cyberpunk definitely, I think, had external pressure to push. You know, Bethesda, at very least, is a privately owned company as far as I know. I don't know what its structure looks like. Well, they're a subsidiary now, but what were they before? Yeah, sorry, I meant before. Don't know. They were owned by ZeniMax. And ZeniMax... Okay, so... But was ZeniMax a private company or were they public? I don't remember that either. Someone struggle for premature release. One of them is named Sony. Nice. One of them is called my dad as well. Oof. Yeah, Cyberpunk 100% had external pressure. I know that for a fact. I don't know about Fallout 76. I think Fallout 76. There were so many problems with Fallout 76. I mean, it was made by a company that was freshly made. It was Bethesda Austin, and they were being forced to work on it in the creation engine, which was never meant for multiplayer. So I think they got fucked in a lot of ways. And then so much of the backlash, according to the initial release, was not due to them, but was due to fucking Todd Howard and all the controversies with the canvas bag, Nuka Dark Rum, and I think there was one other thing. Was there not a 3-hour bug video about bugs in Fallout 76 post-release? Yes. 16 times the detail, yeah. Hurt you while you throw Dad under the bus like that? He'll laugh at it. Yeah, Fallout 76 was buggy, and I think a lot of it was that they were forced to make a multiplayer game in an engine that was never intended to have multiplayer. I don't get what their thought was with that. I think they were just kind of forced on it by Bethesda's main studio. Anthem was also an experience, true. Poor BioWare. Well, yep. I don't have much hope for BioWare anymore.
The logic behind it all.
Our overruling principle.
And I also want to say too, one of the other.
I actually think Starfield, by the way, was Bethesda's most stable release and one of the most stable releases for an open world game in recent years. Like they definitely learned from past mistakes with bugs. There were still bugs, but they were not nearly as game breaking or fucked up as. I promise you, if anybody remembers like Skyrim release, Fallout 4 on release, these were not stable at all. And in a lot of cases, they still aren't. You'd force to change the Frostbite because of some execs, yeah.
Big reasons why this happens is because there is a lot more awareness and visibility on bad games now. Like, there were a lot of games that were brought out in the year 2002 that were garbage, but people weren't really talking about them and making video essays about how bad they are. But now you have so much more focus and attention that's being put on these bad games, especially whenever they're made by a big company, that one bad game sounds like 10 bad games.
There's some truth to that.
To always maximize shareholder value in any given situation.
All right, go back.
Is to always maximize shareholder.
Sorry.
I might replay Starfield before the new expansion. I might. And I think the game is okay. I don't think it's really... For me, it's okay because I didn't go into it with false expectations. I was like, this seems like a more grounded game. I think that it was probably a little bit overhyped, but I just kind of accepted it.
Laid out the logic behind it all.
This is the guy.
Our overruling principle is to always maximize shareholder value in any given situation.
I think...
And that's the problem, is that any given situation is contemporary, right?
But it's also not wrong. It's like, fine. I mean, that's your focus, sure. I think in this case, you should blame the people who allowed for this purchase to go through. You had a perfectly working company, and you sold it out for some extra cash. Why are you so fucking surprised that later on it goes to hell? You're selling out your decision making to somebody who doesn't know the industry. That's like starting an ice cream shop and then selling it to somebody who works in construction. They're not gonna know the fucking first thing about selling ice cream. Everything gets clamped into end of year. Yeah.
Contemporary
releases are hard to
you're
manage.
Thinking about things in the direct relation that they have to what you are doing at this exact moment. But if you think about it in the long term, doing something could be an investment, but it's hard to communicate that idea to a shareholder group that's unhappy with their quarterly reports.
Yes, exactly.
So that's the problem, is that you have a situation where it's literally the blind leading the blind, but neither of them are really blind, but it's in their best interest to be. Like, the executives probably know what's going on to an extent, but they don't care. And the shareholders probably know what's going on to an extent, but they don't care either. It's literally what's happening.
The goal of maximizing quarterly profits is really the death of any artistic industry. And that
I can agree with that.
view on it, where we have to absolutely maximize profit, is the thing that is eating us alive right now.
Yeah.
One thing that kept coming up as I spoke to journalists and game developers is the question.
Well, this will always be the case. People will always want to make more money. This will always happen. And you do see some companies that are investing long term. Like, this is my opinion. I think that Microsoft's value has the potential to 5x in the next 5 to 10 years, maybe 15 years. Because I think that Microsoft has set up such an infrastructure and foundation that if they can nail any sort of cloud gaming to where it's actually accessible by a lot of people, and nail other forms of like cloud computing, and make it accessible to an average person, it's going to completely change everything, right? It will 5x, no shot. I would be surprised if it wasn't more.
I don't know. I mean, I think with the way that some technology is going, I think if anybody's going to continue to just go spiral upwards, it will be NVIDIA. And a lot of Microsoft's technology relies on NVIDIA at this point, especially with AI and with the cloud computing. It's reliant on NVIDIA. Sure, Microsoft might be the one that is utilizing the hardware, but who makes the hardware? It's NVIDIA. NVIDIA is currently exploding. Yeah, it's absolute wild just how much NVIDIA is worth as a company. It is ridiculous. It's in Polish zloty, so just ignore that. Just divide it by 4 for US dollars. What is it? What am I looking at? Why is it not showing me max? There we go. Sorry. It's weird. NVIDIA, dude. NVIDIA's, it's so wild just how much this is worth. They did a split recently, I think. Or not a split. What's a reverse split, right? Is when you consolidate shares. So it used to be worth a lot more, but then they consolidated shares. I think if any company is going to continue to go upwards like this, it will be NVIDIA and not Microsoft. I could be wrong though. I'm no expert on this. $61.86 billion in revenue for Microsoft. Net income of 22. Net income for NVIDIA is 14.15. Yeah, Microsoft is steady growth. NVIDIA is more exposed to AI hype. AI and certainly like computing. Like people always think of, oh, NVIDIA, I can get my graphics card there. Yeah, but the amount of money that they make from consumer graphics card is minimal compared to the amount of money they're making from like data centers, right? And the and selling, what's the word? Like not commercial. Let's just say like a non-commercial GPUs and other hardware and software. Like NVIDIA is doing a ridiculous amount of work in R&D. The amount of money that NVIDIA spends on R&D is wild. And NVIDIA R&D spending. R&D expenses for fiscal years ending January 2020 to 2024 average $5.6 billion. I mean, if we took a look at AMD, that is pretty much the revenue of AMD. Is the amount that NVIDIA just spends in R&D. That's wild. and that's one of the reasons why I buy NVIDIA GPUs, right? Is just because they have the technology. Like they have the technology, they have the a lot of the software behind them that just AMD can't compete with.
To be honest with you, Microsoft couldn't do that with Google. Microsoft could do what Google Stadia didn't. Yeah, exactly. Because we all know that in 100 years, we will probably all be cloud gaming, right? Like I would pretty much, I would assume that. 100 years, we're
Google has an aneurysm and trying to decide between USGPO
so
and yeah,
it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And I think that they have the most infrastructure to take the fullest advantage of it. And gaming's only one component too, by the way.
The industry has, for years, been laying off workers once a game is completed. But
yeah,
some of the most revered games,
it's not just companies laying off people when a game is completed. There's turnover for a variety of reasons. There's average turnover. The average turnover in the game industry, I think, is about like 10 to 15%. And that's not necessarily to do with people getting laid off. A lot of people just quit. Or, you know, they find another company to go work for. Either the production was hell, they were overworking, and they're like, I don't want to do this. I'm going to go find a company that treats me better. They quit. Or it's like, you know what, I'm really proud of working on this game, but I think I want to go try to work on a different game, right? Because maybe, let's just use Elden Ring as an example because it's here. Maybe somebody working for From Software is like, you know what, I want to go work on an MMORPG now, right? Something different, something to challenge me. Not working on Elden Ring 2, Electric Boogaloo, or Dark Souls 5. That's understandable. So there is turnover rate for a variety of reasons. I don't think that the majority of people, I don't think the majority of video game turnover rate is due to people being let go when a company is finishing a game.
Elden Ring, Tears of the Kingdom are made by studios.
Yeah, also, I don't want to do cloud gaming either, Implodey. Because not only the stable internet connection, but also I'm going to have latency. And there's a lot of games where I don't want latency and I don't want a drop in quality. I want to see it on my hardware with minimal latency so I can enjoy it without those interruptions. I think people end up projects double dipping the quarterly earnings because now you also don't pay bonuses.
Hang on to its workers.
You're implying that game dev pays bonuses.
Sequel after sequel. I'd argue
Funny.
it shows.
In my first layoff, now you've got 80 people who lost 40 people who now need to fill in all of those gaps among
Rockstar is
themselves
based.
and can't hire to fill those slots.
And you also have the component, like, this is something that's really big that people don't really talk about a lot because it's much more subjective, is what it does to morale. How it affects morale when you're losing, like, everybody, like, there's like a rapture that happens in your company, and you lose 3 out of your 4 friends at the company.
Yeah.
It destroys morale.
He's right.
So
and morale in a creative industry is very important. I mean, I've talked before about how I worked for a company that would openly lie to employees in order to keep morale high. That's dangerous. I mean, not only is that just, I could get into a whole rant about this. It's disrespectful. It's very immature. These lies will always, come to light eventually. But morale just is important for creatives. You aren't going to feel like you can come in and think of a new character to write for a game if you're just feeling depressed because half of your team was laid off. Who could? Of course you can't. So now you're not working. The company fired half of your team because your team was costing too much, but now the other half of the team is barely working because they're too depressed because their morale is shit. And a pizza party isn't going to fix it. Rockstar also did some definitely not based stuff. You are 100% right. I mean, now talking about GTA Online. Yeah, but GTA Online is a very good example.
You're left.
To make a
you're stupid
project,
if you're not trying to apply somewhere else.
Or severely cut scope. And even then, you might not have all the tools that you had previously because now you've got giant knowledge gaps amongst your team.
Yep.
With this recent round of layoffs,
100% true.
The problem won't just be that an experienced worker is gone from a specific studio. They might leave the industry altogether.
Yep. A lot of them are doing that.
How many more buggy
the day before? Oh God. Yeah. No, this is very true. I've heard that a lot of guys that, especially if they work in the space of not just gaming, as in programming the way a zombie works, but if they work in the network design of gaming or administration of gaming, that jobs that are in the same sector for other companies pay way higher.
Yes, I mean, there's multiple things to unpack here. So number one, I see on LinkedIn all the fucking time nowadays people saying, I'm done with the game industry, I'm going somewhere else. People who are very talented, people who worked at AAA and got laid off. And it sucks. It really sucks to see. I can't imagine the stress and helplessness that you feel in that situation. But there's also the case that he's right, that other industries can pay much better than the game industry, provide better benefits, and won't fuck you over with work hours. A lot of the times. Unfortunately, as a game designer, I don't have that luxury. There's not much that game design can do if I'm not designing games, right? So, but programmers have it a bit better. Artists, can generally switch between some different professions. It's just not great. It's not great. Game dev is a very specialized industry in a lot of cases, and when people are laid off, they don't often have a lot of options. Client-side predictive multiplayer games are practically already cloud gaming. What you see on the screen is not precisely what is happening on the server. Yet, P2P exists. I think he's referring to cloud rendered and streamed graphics. Maybe. Makes ping from default 140 to 280 round trip. Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of it. Yeah, okay. Hope our AC is being installed well.
Failed promises are going to start popping up in games in 2 years when half the experienced people are gone.
Even when I was in...
Is he showing this as a bug of purposefully clipping the camera? AC seems to be working for now. I'm glad to hear it was a pretty quick install.
Games in 2 years.
Like clipping into the back of a head is not a bug, if you ask me. It's
when half the experienced people
I don't
are
know.
gone.
Even when I was in college, people told me that the average time for people to spend in games was 5 years, and then people either burn out or find something different that doesn't crush them.
Yes, exactly.
And so now, what impetus?
Yeah, crunch is really bad. Crunch is like it's like one of those euphemisms that people use for something that's bad. Well, crunch is whenever you have to work 90 hours a week. And then there's another one, sprint. Isn't that cute? It's a sprint.
Those are different things. I mean, sprint is a term in agile development, right? Or specifically, I think in Scrum. I don't think it exists when you're using Kanban methodology, but it exists in Scrum. Like a sprint is one set of work. It's like a section. Yeah, Scrum is part of agile, but a sprint I don't think is part of Kanban methodology. It's part of Scrum methodology for agile. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. Which is the reason why I won't work in the US despite the fact that I could. Ironically, the US does not work as many long hours as even Poland. The US, I think, works about similar hours as Poland. And most Polish days are like 7 hours a day. People always say like there's a lot of like US is overworked, it's crunch, but I think that there might be some specific industries that are pushing that further than others. Sounds like overtime with more steps. No, so when you have like let's say I work 7 hours. So when you have Scrum, you have sprints, right? That are usually like 2 weeks. So you have sections of work that are 2 weeks like this. And each of these are a sprint. And you have sprint goals, so things that you want to consider, you want to finish by the end of the sprint, and you fill this with tasks, right? So sprint is not overwork, it's just management of tasks. Sprint and Kanban methodology or orthogonal, you can do both. You're right. But sprints are part of this methodology. So sprints are not overworking. They're just a way to break down tasks into usually 1 to 2 week intervals. Because you want to be agile, right? So if you need to change this sprint because you didn't finish everything in this sprint, you can move all the tasks from this one over to the next one. And then fill in some overflow tasks from the previous sprint and fill in some smaller things that aren't necessary. So it's just a way of breaking up larger features into smaller tasks and then finishing a certain number of tasks in a small amount of time. And then usually at the end of 2 weeks, you have what's called a retrospective, or I think it's after a couple sprints. Honestly, it's so malleable that you can do it whenever. But you usually, after each sprint, you might do a retrospective. Hey, how did this sprint go? Did we make any mistakes here? Did we fuck anything up? You have a review as well, so a review, and then you do sprint planning, maybe somewhere around this area for this sprint, right? And you plan out all the tasks that you're going to put in this sprint. So sprint is a whole different thing. Sprint has nothing to do with crunch. In fact, it's usually meant to help prevent overworking or prevent issues of you. It's better time management and better way to quantitatively track work. It sounds kind of like a way to mask overwork, but it has nothing to do with overworking or with crunching. Yeah. Crunch as a whole is a separate thing, and that's something that usually almost always happens because of poor planning. And the reason is that you have crunch in a lot of cases is that it is nearly impossible to plan a game development 3 years and be perfectly accurate about it. It's nearly impossible. So you try to mitigate that by doing things like better pre-production, better prototyping, not adding feature creep, being able to say no to new features. The problem is that there are always going to be unknowns. There are always going to be problems that occur that you just didn't anticipate. And this is where, like, investors, if they say, no, we expect this game to be out Q2 of 2025, not Q3. We need Q2 earnings. Otherwise, we get fucked. So you need to find a way to release this game Q2. Well, now you have a problem because you know that you need another 3 months to finish development, and Q3 would be perfect for you. But now Q2 is what you have to do, so you push out a buggy game that is unfinished, and you're like, okay, well, we're gonna have to fix it in patches later. This is where you're at. Better time management as long as your dailies aren't at 2 p.m. completely forcing your brain into waiting mode for the entire first half of the day. Yeah, that's weird. That's really weird. I know for Microraptor, we're planning to do a couple of different combination methodologies. So we want to use a Kanban board to be a bit more agile with fixing bugs before working on new features to help keep our releases and features stable. And we want to implement a zero bug policy, which it sounds weirder than it is, but what it means is that we prioritize fixing bugs before working on new features. So when we make a feature, we test it immediately and as a team, and then we fix the bugs that we find with it before saying, okay, now it's time to pull in the next feature. Not sure if Kanban is great for bugs. Some dedicated bug tracker might work better. It's possible. We will just be, I think, we'll be flexible with it. The good thing about Kanban is that we won't have a significant backlog, right? Because that's the point of Kanban. So if we need to transition, we after retrospective, like, hey, this isn't working out for us, I think we can. Take some mental fortitude to do the hard work like that, rather than just seeing what sticks. What do you mean, Panzer? Can you rephrase that so I don't misunderstand? Well, it depends on the amount of known bugs. That's true. And I think that's really going to be dependent. Like if we can, large game may go into thousands of bug reports. Ideally you shouldn't. I have worked on a game where we had like 300 bug reports, and yeah, Kanban's not going to work there. But the reason that it got so bad is because we kept working on new features instead of fixing the bugs. And that's where the zero bug policy will come in. It's like, no. Bugs rank this priority, features rank this priority. We fix bugs. Test the feature now. Test it now. We are not moving on to this until all the bugs are gone. Poof. Fully bash out the bugs before moving on. I think it works. Everybody who's been talking about zero bug policy and implementing it properly says that it has worked and it has benefited the team, and it has multiple benefits. So it makes the code base a lot more stable, so that when you're working on new features, you're not working off of buggy previous features. Because you're working on bugs immediately after implementing the feature, the coders who have just worked on it have better knowledge of what they just wrote, so they don't have to review a lot of their code. The third one is that QA doesn't have to work so hard to retest old bugs that are still in the backlog, and they don't have to maintain such a large backlog because they're actively just finding new bugs, posting them, and those are getting pulled in before new features are being worked on. A fourth one is that builds that are sent to the publisher are a lot more stable. And number 5, the builds that are released to the players are a lot more stable. So it does change the way that development is handled a bit because we're not prioritizing features as heavily as we are fixing bugs in that moment. But the benefits, I think, if it's done properly, vastly outweigh the negatives of a slightly different development cycle. Fixing bugs for a project that might change massively can just cost money, so I value MVP more. But it depends on phase, right? So before vertical slice, we shouldn't have this policy, right? Because the point of prototyping, your point of your first playable, is that it will be buggy. But going from first playable to vertical, working on our vertical slice, implementing this policy is going to be very crucial for developing the proper pipelines and making sure that the quality of our features is high. And same with our tools. And the tools is probably one of the most underrated aspects of that, where we need to fix bugs with our tools because these help us create the rest of the game more stably and faster. So you can do MVP, bugs, new features, polish, sure. I think that when you're prototyping the system first, you don't need to fix bugs with the prototype. They're just to help you find the unknowns, and then you work on that new feature. You fix the bugs for it before jumping into the next feature. We're gonna try it. I think we're gonna implement it. So far from talking to friends in QA, it seems like this would be possible and very beneficial for them. Coders that I've talked to seem to like it because it means that they don't need to review old code, to fix bugs. And I think obviously the benefits for players and publishers is just, it doesn't need to be stated because of course a more stable build is better for everybody. So I think it can be done.
People have to stay when it was
all
already
hands,
risky, and now it's just even riskier.
Because of consolidation and mass layoffs, gamers are going to see a decline in good quality games.
What about performance? Performance can be caused either by bugs or by sloppy code or just something that isn't optimized. I mean, you could say that's sloppy code, but I don't think so. There are many reasons for performance issues. I think performance is mostly going to be handled in beta phase, for sure, depending on if we go to early access or not. If we don't, it'll be handled in beta phase. If we go to early access, it will be handled throughout alpha and beta. So it just depends on what's causing it. If it's a bug in the code causing a massive frame spike, that's a bug. If it is just that this level is kind of loading in too many assets, that's less of a bug and more of a we need to just fix this level, right? So it kind of just depends on situation to situation.
Maybe, pressed to find the little amount of investment that is out there, big studios will save money by crunching more projects, making more people work inhumane hours, and rushing more games that will inevitably get mocked mercilessly on the internet.
Yeah.
There is one check on this mad dash to appease shareholders: unions. In March, Sega of America employees
I have my feelings
were the
about
first
unions.
group of video game workers at
Oh, this video is already a little bit outdated. The Sega did make their own union, but recently all of the Blizzard employees for the World of Warcraft team have unionized. And it seems like a lot of the people at Microsoft are trying to unionize as well. This just happened, I think, 1 or 2 days ago. So then this video is from a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, it's already started to happen. And you're seeing these companies, and by the way, I don't think it will really matter. And the other reason why they're trying to unionize, apparently,
I'll give my thoughts on unions in a second,
is that they don't want to lose their job to some form of AI or something like that. And I think that a lot of people are worried about that. It's happening? No, it is. It is definitely happening. I personally think that it won't matter, and I don't think the unions will make that big of a difference. They will just stop a problem from happening quite as quickly.
I think unions are not inherently a good or bad thing. I think it depends on the industry and the issues that are being faced within that specific company or that specific industry. Do I think that game developers should unionize? Sometimes. I think Blizzard is a great example. I think Bethesda may be a good example, but I don't really know what their working conditions are like. Obviously, if your company is overworking you, is performing crunch, is having these layoff issues, not really providing a lot of job stability, might have issues with AI, sure, that might be a worry. I think there's very much a significant reason to unionize, right, to prevent some of this stuff from happening. I don't know if every company needs it, right, because unions are also good when it comes to financial stability. Yes, I agree. For instance, Cold and Crunch or Microraptor Games won't have crunch, and it's not that we say we won't have crunch. It is literally going to be written in our contracts that it's not allowed. That you work your hours for the week, you go home. Simple as that. It's just not. It's not even a question. And so I don't really think people need to unionize at Microraptor Games, because we're going to be looking out for our employees naturally. It's a case of, if you need to do it, I think that there are cases where it's really useful, like Blizzard, but you can also avoid it or just not have it happen at your company if you just don't have these problems. Simple as that. So, like, don't crunch your employees, don't fuck things up. US, I'd rather fight a wrongful termination lawsuit with a lawyer paid by a union than a lawyer I'd have to pay myself. I mean, maybe. I think the U.S. has a lot of benefits for employers and employees, both. Just different ones. In the EU here, I don't like that I can't quit a job after working at someplace for like a few years. I have to work there for either another month or another 3 months before I'm allowed legally to quit, which I think is just really stupid. I really like in the US, you can just quit a job. Just, nope, I'm done. Sayonara. Probably, for example, requires the pay to be stated. Yeah, for one thing, okay, I will say we will state the pay that we will pay for employees. No crunch in our contracts. Anything can wait till Monday. There's no reason to screw up your health, your family, your mental state, any of that, just so that we can release a patch a day sooner. At least we can get fired without any warning. I think that there's times where firing people without warning is a good thing. I hate to say it, but there are some times where employees need to be fired without warning. And like in the EU here, there's a lot of people who take advantage of rules like that and fuck over employers. I think that there are it's not an issue with rules, it's an issue with how people utilize these rules. If you got rid of the law that, puts you in jail for a shit ton of time for murder, people would murder more, sure. But there would also be a majority of people that wouldn't murder, because they still just don't think it's right. And here in the EU, you can get fired immediately for stuff like gross negligence. For gross negligence, sure, but it has to be provable. And it isn't always provable.
American company,
not easily, at least,
to win a union contract. They negotiated not just pay raises.
I'm just saying unions, I don't think are inherently a good or bad thing.
Workers at ZeniMax,
it all depends.
Fallout and the Elder Scrolls series, unionized in 2023. And while they're still at the bargaining table, they've already won concessions.
Yeah, but that's to unionize. I feel like it's a lot of different groups inside of the Microsoft umbrella that have tried to unionize
over the use of AI.
Unions aren't going to...
Let me go back just so I can hear that.
Makers of Fallout and the Elder Scrolls series, unionized in 2023. And while they're still at the bargaining table, they've already won concessions over the use of AI.
Unions aren't going to stop the layoffs tomorrow.
No, they won't.
But on an individual, like studio level, unions have helped people keep their jobs.
Unionizing would...
The problem is that unions can be bad. And
yes,
a lot of people bring up good points that unions can be problematic in a number of different ways. But the issue is that right now, I think that if you think of it as a pendulum, I think the pendulum is way too far in the control of the companies and the leadership of the companies, and it's too asymmetrical. And I do think that you need unions to bring that back closer to the middle.
100% agree. Unions can be bad, and he's right. I think that there are legitimate reasons in a lot of companies, especially AAA, that developers should unionize. That doesn't mean that every company in game dev needs to unionize. It all depends. It all depends. And there are plenty of cases where unions have just absolutely, they have way too much power, and they have obtained ridiculous amounts of money from employers who, are put in a bad position because of this. Is that they're fighting the symptoms caused by a market that has too few restrictions on employers at times. Yeah, I mean, there's just no reason for this crunch to occur. There's no reason for it. hired as a full-time employee, but they mean to fire you the moment the project is finished. They should 100% state that it is a project-based position. 100% agree. I would not mind a law that required that.
Better games. For starters, right now, individuals have very little power, and whether or not you are actually replaceable, you're going to be seen as replaceable.
You probably are replaceable. That's the thing. It's like, it's such a competitive industry that there are people that can replace you, and a lot of times for cheaper. So yeah, people in game dev just don't feel like they have a lot of stability, and they're right, they don't, because they can be replaced, because there's always somebody, especially at AAA companies, that wants to work there. How many people, if you said, yeah, hey, do you want to work on GTA 6? Oh yeah, you have the skills for it? Okay, do you want to do it? Yeah. I mean, you would easily be able to find at least 100 people like that. Easily, at least 100, maybe even 1,000. It's fucking Rockstar. It's GTA 6. You know what that would do for your resume? Incredible things. So, you are replaceable, unfortunately, and I can understand it. There's no way that I wouldn't be able to understand a desire to make that more stable.
To an executive, a game designer is a game designer. The amount of specialization involved between disciplines of design is not something that is understood at the corporate level. And in general,
I've worked for people like that. They don't understand. They don't understand, oh, you're a game designer, so you can design this game. It's like, well, no, I don't specialize in this game. I mean, I'm going to do my best, but I'm going to have to play a shit ton of games like this. I'm going to have to break down what makes them special. I'm going to have to analyze the market to see what does this market expect and what are they looking for from this game. You know, it's not my forte. It's like I'm not that great at physics. I'm not that great with like the math behind physics. So if I have to work in a game that requires a decent understanding of mathematical physics, I'm really not good at it. I'm really not good at it.
Happier people,
and that's just like general game design. That isn't even talking about like narrative design or level design. It's like they all think, oh, design, so it must be the same thing, right?
Or at least people who are cared for and fulfilled
they work
their
harder.
Basic needs are going to be more effective.
They have that in Pal World. So like I learned this from Pal World, is that if you have the pals that are sad, they don't
So
work as
coding,
fast.
right?
So you want to build them hot tubs, and that way they'll work at night.
Their jobs, and a union is something that can absolutely help.
I mean, I don't know if a union that directly has involvement with like satisfaction at work. I think that's more of like there is a some space between those two things. But what I can say for sure is that it's been proven time and time again that mentally healthy and happy employees work harder and better, especially in creative fields. So of course you want to avoid that. And somebody, down here you see pizza parties. A lot of executives thinks that's the solution, but a lot of times the majority of mental health issues with working on games comes from burnout, and most of that comes from crunch. You then have a significant portion of that comes from people feeling like they aren't making a difference, right? Especially creatives, they like to be challenged. Artists love to be challenged.
Get people the basic
Power World
dignity that they deserve.
Let me ask, because I'm always burnt out.
As for myself, probably never see the resolution.
Even if you're passionate about game dev, and I think I would even say that maybe some of the most passionate people about game dev are some of the easiest to get burnt out, because they put so much emotion into it that if something stifles that emotion, it feels like your whole flame of ambition is being snuffed out in that instance, right? So yeah, I mean, I felt burnt out before. It's one of the reasons that I've left studios before, and I'm trying to avoid that now by being a bit more healthy with my development practices and not overworking myself by like spending, 16 hours a day working on games like I used to back when I was working on, Flame of Ambition, right? Back when I was working on Darkest Dungeon, right? I was working they weren't overworking me. I was working about 8 to 9 hour days with Darkest Dungeon, but then I spent the rest of the day working on my mod on my free time. So I spent the entire day, every day, including weekends, and holidays working on Darkest Dungeon. It was all I could think about. And of course, I didn't understand it at the time, but I was burnt the fuck out. I ended up hating the game. Not because the game was bad, but because I was tired of it. But I kept forcing myself. Just jump back in and do more. Keep pushing, keep grinding. And I hated it. And even now, I still like, I don't really want to think about Darkest Dungeon because, you know, it just brings up that bad memory. And I don't want to think about games that I worked on with a bad memory. I had a lot of fun working on that, but I got burnt the fuck out. Collab with Asmon, hell yeah.
The
First,
cliffhanger
being
from
challenged
Last
in
Deus Ex,
Fluid Flux.
purely
I think that somebody will do it. It's just that the Embracer Group feels like they can't make any money off of it. And they could be right.
True.
Also, I feel like this is what happened. Like, Saints Row came out, and it was a complete fucking failure.
Yes, it was.
They look at where Deus Ex was at the time, and they think to themselves, oh, let's not carry this to term. Let's just get an abortion. Like, that's probably...
But I don't think Deus Ex, man. I mean, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but like for sure we looked up the stats earlier. The Saints Row, the new Saints Row, just sold like trash. It's reviewed like trash. It's sold like trash. But I don't think any of the recent Deus Ex games have sold poorly. Mankind Divided was the latest one, right? 1.7 to 6. Honestly, I'm surprised. I'm surprised that's not higher. The previous one was Human Revolution, right? Yeah. 2 to 6 million, okay. I thought this sold better than it did. I'm very surprised by that.
Probably what fucking happened. And I bet that if you had the same information that the leadership for that company had, I bet it probably would make more sense than it does to the public.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, it's very possible that they looked at how much it would cost to make the new Deus Ex, and they said, the market just really isn't there for that anymore. You know, the amount of sales we got from the previous one just was not super significant, and the amount of money that it would take to keep the company afloat long enough to make the new Deus Ex probably just didn't equate to being a super profitable venture. I'm not saying that is a good or bad thing, right? I'm just saying from their perspective, it's very possible that the number of individuals interested in playing a new Deus Ex has fallen off a bit. I would imagine that's probably what it is. And because of that, the market isn't there. Therefore, it is not a significantly marketable game. And sustaining a development team of 100 plus people isn't going to happen.
Because if I think about it from their perspective, I totally get that. I can easily
You're right, it
see
was
how
always
that
a
would
niche
happen.
game. But it's also been bloated in cost to develop because of the increase in fidelity, right? You know, this increase in fidelity, you have to have more artists, more time to optimize it, things like that. You know, levels get bigger, mechanics get bloated. You know, it's just the rising cost of creating games has pushed all of these games with niche audiences that you could sell a game to. You could make a Deus Ex game. It's the audience is still there, clearly, that wants a Deus Ex game, that would buy one. Is it as big as before? Maybe not. And can you sustain that development for enough time to make a profit? Maybe not, especially when, you know, Deus Ex Mankind Divided looked good. It's a very good looking game. And so you have to match that or exceed that. And I think expectations will be that you exceed that. And that's expensive.
Because some executive didn't like the way it looked on a spreadsheet and fired everyone working on it.
No.
And when it comes to workers like Colin and Alex,
And also, I think that there is a degree where a lot of these like people that work in game development, in the same way that people that work in, you know, these executive positions and like in these finance positions are telling the game developers how they should make video games.
Yes.
And sometimes they're wrong. And in a lot of cases, they're wrong. I think that there are also instances where there are game developers that are getting together trying to tell these people in finance positions what they should be doing, but they're wrong too.
100%. 100%.
That's what I think.
Yes. You know, a good like relationship with a publisher it's a healthy business relationship of honesty, and it's of compromise. It's where the developers say, okay, I understand that we need to reach a bit of a larger audience for this to be successful, so I will cut back on this feature because it doesn't really appeal to the audience that we're trying to reach, even though I want it in the game. And vice versa. I think a good publisher is like, okay, you want to spend a couple extra weeks making sure that this has a bit more depth. Okay, that's fine. We'll delay the milestone by a couple weeks and we'll let you work on it. I feel some of the franchises should have side branches of the game to make it appeal to mainstream. That way you can corral them into other titles of the same universe. Yes, but it's a risk. And because it's a risk, why not just make Borderlands 4? They know they're going to make money from it. They know people will buy it. Even though with Borderlands, they did say that recently that they had a lot of success with Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, which I think was like an alright game. It was like a 7, 8 out of 10 for me. I think it sold well just because of Tiny Tina, honestly. Everything else about it was actually pretty mediocre compared to the DLC for Borderlands 2.
Just want to make good games. In Colin's case, he's now working on indie games.
But it's a compromise.
Good for him.
It's a compromise. Every game developer wants to make good games. Of course we do. Of course. Every indie dev is usually in it because they want to make something that they don't think exists in the market. But the problem is that it isn't always marketable. And I hate to say it, but publishers, they know what's marketable. In a lot of cases, they know. So there's a compromise that needs to be reached here. It's the fact that the DLC was fantastic. People wanted it to be good. Yeah, DLC was fantastic.
If we are focused on making sustainable teams and making interesting art, the players will find it themselves. And if we are creating niches to be filled, then the niches will be filled.
Absolutely.
The buzzing is back. Everything seems to be back to normal. The buzzing from the hanging pump. Sorry guys, we're dealing with AC shit. So like the AC is working, but the pump is buzzing again. Wonderful. Is it as bad as before? What do you mean, Mrs. Raptor? Well, yeah, pretty much. So they initially had the pump for the AC because it's the AC install in our apartment is kind of shit. They had it installed to the ceiling, so the vibrations from the pump working, which I still think is very weird, was causing a lot of noise. So one of the guys suspended the pump in the air to try and avoid that vibration from causing so much noise. Apparently, it didn't fix it.
Absolutely.
Not how vibrations work. Yeah, it is. I have a vibrator. My love ends is controlled to Twitch.
Fucking Lootwing. Yeah, this is a great point.
I would love to keep reporting on the video game industry, but I need your help. If you have any experience in the video game industry and have a story to tell, send us a line at stories@perfectunion.us.
Oh, I have stories to tell.
Stories@perfectunion.us.
I got stories.
I'd love to read them. Thanks for watching.
What a great video. And I agree with pretty much everything he said in the video. I do think that, like, if you had access to the back end and what the projections were, then I feel like a lot of these things would make more sense. And also,
right.
By the way, how do people make projections? So what they do is they have to bring in a donkey, and then they put a dartboard on the side of the donkey, and then they blindfold the secretary, and they have her throw darts at the dartboard. And they just put those numbers on the projections, and that's how they decide how much money they're going to make.
Seems about right.
So yeah, it's not necessarily a fucking science here. However, with a lot of the cases, I think that it makes sense that they were going to shut down these games.
Yes,
because
I agree.
It's very easy
shitty
for
as it is
us to say, oh wow, it's so sad that they shut down this game. We didn't see the game. None of us saw the game.
It's true.
These guys saw the fucking game. So with something like Saints Row,
Well, you'd also be most games do get canceled. By the way, most game ideas that even get through prototyping stage do not make it to release. Most. So the number of games that are released is only a tiny fraction of games that are actually end up being worked on, because it's just much cheaper to cancel a shit idea when it's shit, right? And so he's right. There are a lot of times where it's like, oh, new Deus Ex game was canceled. Yeah, but was it good? Was it actually good? We don't know that. You know, the only ones we can tell are the ones that were released, like the new Saints Row game. And we looked, it sold like shit. It makes sense. It still sucks that Volition was closed, but it, from a numbers standpoint, they probably just didn't have the money to keep the company going. And no amount of CEOs taking less in pay, pay rises is going to float. I don't even know how many people were working at Volition, probably at least 50 to 100 people, for another 3 years or more, 3 to 5 years, to make another Saints Row game that is actually going to be successful. Like, do you think Saints Row 3 and 4, with their like 300 concurrent players max every week, is going to support development for that long? No, it's not. They'd have to take out a business loan or find other investors, and that's all more risk being added to the company that they would then have to pay back after the new game gets released. So what do? Well, the cheapest thing is to just close the studio. It sucks, but it is what it is.
Saints Row comes out, it's fucking awful. They see this game and they see, oh, I think people are going to say the same thing about this game. Let's fucking cancel it. And by the way, big companies do this too. Blizzard did this with StarCraft Ghost, and they also did it recently with the unannounced survival game that they decided to destroy. And then you also have Riot, who was making an MMO, and they recently, like Mark Merrill, who's the CEO of Riot, came out, or president, I'm not sure which one, came out, and he was like, we're starting over. They basically canned the project.
Yeah, and I think, it there's like so many people that get fucked over by this kind of stuff, because, I look at the artwork for canceled projects like this, and a lot of it is really, really amazing. It's beautiful artwork. It looks like a beautiful world. But guess what? If the gameplay isn't there, it doesn't really matter how beautiful the world is. It really doesn't. So it does suck, because you have exceptional quality being done by some teams, and other teams just maybe didn't hit the mark, or there was too much different ideas of what to put in the game that it just didn't work on a gameplay level. And yeah, it is what it is. But it's like that's what you get when you get a game that is well made, like a 10 out of 10 game. Take Elden Ring. It's because everything in that fucking game is firing on all cylinders. Every team in Elden Ring and From Software is just firing their cum all over the industry and just shrugging their shoulders like, oops, guess we released another 10 out of 10 game. So, it takes a lot to make a game good. It takes every team being exceptional and working on all cylinders. And it takes good producers to manage and organize all that. And you can have great teams with a bad production team, and the game will be shit. DLC is the size of Limgrave and other stories you can tell yourself at night. I didn't like the DLC map. I'll tell you that.
They canned it, and they said that basically
DLC
they
8 out of 10 for me.
They said
7 to 8
everything that
out
we're
of 10.
doing, it's not working. Let's try it again. They basically canceled it and started a new game. Yeah, exactly. Like, that's huge. So big companies have the freedom to do that because they have all these other games that exist in the ecosystem that can afford to prop up a loss, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. That's why, like, make a live service game, use live service game to prop up the creation of other games. That way you can afford to take your time.
One of the good things about being in a big company and having diversified assets.
Yep.
It's the same thing as having a stock portfolio or anything else. You want to diversify assets in basically anything that you do other than probably finding your girlfriend. So, and even that is debatable.
3D map would have been amazing for that.
Here is that with a lot of these people that are trying to
fun.
make money in the video game industry, some of them I don't think are as stupid as we think we are, as they are. And I think that if we had access to the same information that they did, we would see their point of view. We would.
Yes, I think that there's there's probably a roughly equal amount of times that the layoffs financially make sense, and other times where it seems very one-sided, right? Where, especially with like the Bungie, right, where this guy is the CEO is buying 13 new cars. I'm sorry, being a CEO is hard, sure. Does it warrant a like $20 million salary? No, probably doesn't. And you could take 10 million of that, you could get a bunch of new employees. $10 million for 1 year, holy shit, could you get a lot of great employees for that. 17.
So yeah, Half-Life was restarted from scratch in 97 too. Also, another big thing is that these huge studios, I don't think that they're sustainable. I don't. There's the video. Give it a like.
No,
this is a
they're
great
not.
video. I really liked it a lot.
50 employees for 10 million? You could get some pretty damn good employees, yeah. You could get 50 really good employees for 10 million a year. And you would still have 10 million a year left over if we assume that the CEO is making 20 million a year, right?
Not sustainable because of their size.
Yep.
They make so much, they cost so much money, and there's so much bloat to the studio. How is it that a small studio, like for example, comparatively, Grinding Gear Games, can deliver a product like Path of Exile, but Diablo can't do the same thing with 10x the budget and 10x the staff? So at a certain point, the 1-to-1 ratio of money spent to money received begins to fall apart. And the reason why more money gets spent is because all the money...
Beginner's Guide 1 hour video. Dude, I love PoE. It's the best ARPG on the market, with the worst new player experience of any ARPG I've ever played. And I really hope PoE 2 fixes it. I hope they've learned their lesson. It's an amazing game that you should not start if you're a new player unless you have like thousands of hours to dump into it. But he's right. It's like, we talked a bit about like, I always bring this up because Larian Studios is a good example. 470 employees, okay? That's ridiculous. Now, assuming they get paid maybe an average of 80,000 US dollars a year, and they probably cost about 33% more than that, or let's just say, let's do a conservative 25%, or even 20%. Let's say 100,000 a year. If we take average of 80,000 salary, we add some on that for other payments associated with employees. Obviously, this multiplication is easy, right? 47 million a year to run Larian Studios. Then we multiply on top of that some overhead for business expenses, such as, I think it's fair to add probably another 10 million on top of that for business expenses, legal stuff, and like paying for only having studios, like physical studios in person, and any benefits that they might have, things of that nature. And of course, we're looking at some easy math of $57 million a year. So when you take a look at the release of Baldur's Gate 3 and the release of Starfield, and they didn't want to have to compete with Starfield, so they pushed the release up by a month. If they had allowed Starfield to be released, they would have probably had to delay the game not by 3 months, because that would have put it into Q4, which means releasing around Christmas, which is bad, especially for Steam sale visibility. They would have had to delay that to Q1 of the following year of 2024. It would have been this year. That would have cost the studio at least $25 million more, and they were self-funding this game. That's a fuck ton of money. That is a fuck ton of money. It's wild. It's wild how much games cost, and he's right, and Asmon's right. There's a lot of bloat in AAA. There's a lot of employees doing not really a lot of work compared to smaller, more streamlined studios. I don't know how many employees Grinding Gear Games has, actually. I'd be curious about that. Employees count 141 according to this. 5 years ago, up to 120 and counting. That's wild. That's wild that Grinding Gear Games is not only working on 2 games at the same time, but they're pumping out seasonal content and making one of the best ARPGs on the market with that small of a team. That is really good optimization. That is really good production. That's incredible, honestly. It's terrifying risk. It is a lot of risk. It is a lot of risk, and I can understand why they wanted to release a month early, even when the game was not in the state to release.
Being spent is perceived as a 3x multiplier. So it's like, if you want to invest money into something that's going to give you 3 times back your money, would you rather put $1,000 or $10,000 into it? Well, I'd rather put $10,000, so I'd get $30,000. Obviously, right? So they're trying to put more and more money into it, thinking that they're just going to basically throw money at this problem and it will solve the problem. Well, it clearly doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, here's the reality. Like, if there's only a certain amount of money within the industry, like from revenue, right? And if we ignore mobile game revenue, right, and we just look at consoles and PC, you can't just increase the bloat and cost of game development in AAA. That doesn't equate to more money being spent on games. That just equates to more money being spent on the development of games. So yeah, if every AAA studio is increasing the cost of the development by $100 million every year or something, that doesn't equate to the amount of revenue being gained from the industry. And also, that revenue gain in the industry does not mean that there are people specifically buying AAA games. It could be that people are spending more on MMORPGs, maybe on like Genshin Impact or something. So you have to equate it to, does this market, does our niche actually have the money to spend on this, and do they want to spend the money on this? And I think AAA is realizing that the answer is no, especially if your game is mediocre. Red Dead Redemption 2 sold like hotcakes. Why? Because it's an amazing game. It's an 11 out of 10 game. Saints Row, the new one, it's an 11 out of 100 game, So is it really worth putting that much time and effort and money into creating something that is just substandard? No.
Right? Clearly does not do that. In addition, China banned all American Gamba skins roulette games. I'm not sure about that. But yeah, that's why I think it's happening. Private equity is only one component to it. And I think that also a lot of companies have been owned by private equity for quite a while, but COVID did speed it up, and I think it definitely normalized it. I think here's another reason why private equity is getting a lot bigger and more popular for games. Straight up real reason. I know some of the guys that do this. I know them. They are closer to my age than a boomer, and some of them are around our age. It's because the people that are working in these companies now have enough pull and they have enough experience and authority that they can make decisions in this space where previously the people that they were working for 50 years ago, working there, they've been working there 30 years, and now they're 65. They don't have that intimate understanding with games. But now you have these firms that are bringing in the new guys, and they do understand it intuitively. They understand it on a deep level because they play and they interact with the games on a daily basis themselves. So now you have a higher degree of competency, so that's why they're able to go after this money.
But you'd think if they had competency, they would realize that games are a longer term investment unless they are a live service game. And I think that's what makes live service games so interesting to private equity groups, is because it is stable, continuous cash flow, generally speaking, especially compared to a 3 to 4 year release, right?
And so that's the reason why. Gen X and older millennials, absolutely. Yeah,
they love subscription models, yeah.
Exactly.
Well, it's just less risky money.
Yeah, I think that's another big reason, right? Is it
makes sense.
The guys that grew up on Avengers are now old enough to fund the MCU. How convenient, right? You get new blood with more knowledge. Yeah, exactly. I don't understand why you need a union to fill a niche of these gaming companies. Can't you just encourage small companies to make games? Indie games companies, PAX seems like what I'm going for. Why would I want a union in Microsoft or Ubisoft or something? Well, because you work at Microsoft or Ubisoft. So if you don't work there, then it wouldn't be relevant to you. Why does anybody care about a union at Microsoft if you don't work at Microsoft? So for them, the reason why it's important is because it gives them, Do you remember like whenever they were breaking up those like free Palestine protests and everybody was locking arms so the police couldn't get each person?
Yeah.
Think about the police, but they're the executives. And they can't fucking pull one person out of the line because everybody else is holding them. And that's the union, right? Is like the idea that you can't remove one person because everybody else is there to create collective bargaining in the best interest of that person.
But that is dangerous, and that specifically is one of the dangers of unions. And we see it both with game dev, we see it with teachers, especially at least in the U.S. A lot of teachers unions. If there are bad teachers, they will be protected by the unions. If there are bad developers, they will be protected by the unions. Do you really want a bad game designer being protected by a union? I don't. I want good games. I don't want some shitty designer being protected just because he's part of a union and now all the games being made by this company are shit. Like, that's not going to provide good job stability because the game will be shit, the company won't make a lot of money, and then the company goes under either way. Like, I think unions are good for certain things, they're bad for a lot of other things. And I don't think there's no reason for me to protect other developers if they're doing a shitty job. Simple as that. And I don't mean like you make some mistake, but you make consistently shitty decisions and ruin games because you're incompetent as an individual. There are incompetent people in game development. There are incompetent people all around the world in all different industries. I don't think they should be protected. We should be trying to advocate for the best, highest skilled individuals who are being given the decision-making power and are good leaders. This was a good video. I liked it. If you guys want to watch it as well, here is the link in chat. If you're watching on YouTube, thanks for watching that. I know we had like a 2.5 hour YouTube, and nobody's gonna watch this. But thanks for watching on YouTube. We will jump into our next video. So see you next time.